Ryan, welcome to our Precious Payload podcast. Excited to learn more about what you guys do at Turion Space, if I pronounce it correctly, by the way.
Yep, that's right. Turion Space. Great to be on with you here, Andrew, and great to be a part of the Precious Payload community.
Awesome. All right. I know you guys, you've done the YC batch, if I'm not mistaken, YC summer last year. Is it correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Cool. So give me an elevator pitch about the company then.
Cool. Yeah. So at Turion Space, we are building and operating satellites to move stuff around in space and gather SDA data when we're not. When we started the company, we were looking at, with Starship and other launch vehicles like that about to drop the cost of getting things to space by another order of magnitude. That's going to be such a game changer. What new industries are going to exist in the next 10 to 15 years because of that? And one of the things that we're really excited about that we think will happen in the next 10 to 15 years will be asteroid resource utilization, so asteroid mining. Now, if you look at the history of companies that have attempted asteroid mining, it hasn't gone well for them. I think it's really for the same two reasons in all cases. That is, one, these companies, they tried to do it with launch costs of a decade ago, and already they're far cheaper with vehicles like Falcon 9. And two, they tried to go really from zero to asteroid mining. And even with low cost of access to space, it's still going to be a huge capital cost to get those assets developed and to manufacture those at the scale you need to actually do those activities. So when we kind of gave that more thought, what we kind of decided upon was, all right, well, what can we do to kind of bridge that gap? We don't know if we're going to actually do asteroid mining or not. I think it's still speculative, but I think that is one of the key paths towards expanding humanity's footprint in the solar system. And so from there, we decided to work backwards. And the problem we kind of came across really, and this was right around when we were founding the company, was orbital debris. Mm-hmm. Orbital debris is a very important problem to begin trying to solve. And there's not really any great solutions in place. And we'll get more into kind of how we think about orbital debris, but that was really kind of what we set on and how we pitched Y Combinator and how we got into Y Combinator was we want to be a space sustainability company and address orbital debris. And really we see that as a good starting point for future missions like asteroid mining, because in order to get good at the latter, you have to get really good at moving things around in space. In the case of orbital debris, if you want to remove lots and lots of orbital debris, you need to get really good at moving things around in space. Specifically, if you're going to deorbit, you want to dock with the piece of debris, move it to a lower altitude, and rinse and repeat that process until you run out of fuel. Right. So yeah, that's kind of how we first came with the company and how we got into YC. And from there, it's been a wild ride so far.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing. I think you've touched base on the really important topic that is very close to my heart, which is, I always like when I help other space companies with their go-to-market strategy, I always tell them, listen, I believe that there's no reason to make small satellites anymore. Forget CubeSats, forget miniaturization, with Starship and the like, the mass and even the volume would not be a constraint. So think bigger, if when I talk to investors, I tell them, hey, listen, I think from now on, the satellites would only get bigger and bigger. And it's often overlooked of what business models and what applications can be unlocked if mass and volume is not a constraint anymore. So I really applaud the fact that you guys are thinking, out of the box, out of the box of the traditional small space fading. And yeah, I remember 5 years ago when I had similar discussions with companies like Planet Resources and DSI, they all try to bridge the gap between, the vision is asset mining, and they came up with different stepping stones that would enable them commercialize the technology along the way and, keep the lights on and get some profit. So if you've chosen the orbit debris, I'll be curious to know, what do you think the business model would be? Because obviously there are again, speculations about who will be paying for removing those debris, but I would be curious to know, what's your take on that? Who's going to pay the bills to remove the debris?
Absolutely. So although, and I'll say, that's what we started with going into YC is orbital debris. But the reality of the situation is it's that is just as difficult, maybe not as difficult, but it is a very difficult to close on purely space debris removal as a business, because primarily how regulations are currently set up. If you are a satellite operator and your satellite unexpectedly dies, you are not required to go deorbit that object. And there's a reason for that, because the service does not yet exist. There's companies like us, working to bring that to the table. But until that service has been demonstrated as reliable and affordable, the regulations can't evolve. So it's definitely a chicken and the egg problem. And since then, our go-to-market strategy has definitely been adapted to be more real. And even with things like orbital debris removal, if you're going to build a space tug that goes and performs rendezvous operations with a dead satellite that's spinning, and then you want to go and push that down, there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle. And it's not, and all of those pieces are very difficult and could be a startup in and of itself. And so kind of our approach to the problem is, all right, let's just get a min viable product. Let's get something into orbit and let's go from there. And let's try and make money along the way, doing useful stuff that's in line kind of with the philosophy of sustainable space. And so kind of how we've adapted our strategy is, I agree, in the future with Starship, mass and volume are not going to be a constraint. So our future vehicle designs will be designed to take full advantage of that. But until then, as that may be still a few years out before Starship's fully commercially operational. Until then, we're going to try and at least get started and build a foundation of a viable business, doing things like space domain awareness, looking at space objects and selling that data. What we kind of have seen is really in the space domain awareness, it's still such a niche market, but with the amount of stuff that is going to be launched, it's going to become increasingly more important. And we found that there is an appetite for that data. We kind of see it almost as the early stages of Earth observation data. There's a lot of parallels there, but there's also a lot of differences because the things are constantly moving around. So I won't get into too much more on the SDA side, but that's kind of where we see our starting point. And from there, we're going to build small satellites that progressively increase in complexity over time, leading to a larger vehicle that will be optimized for vehicles like Starship and be much more capable of doing things like orbital debris removal. And we hope along the way, as we're kind of as we're going into other verticals that fall under the scope of SDA and moving things around in space, that will build a very competitive product. And hopefully that's what will end up pushing for the regulations to change and driving a viable business model for orbital debris removal. That being said, we're not going to hang our hats on the assumption that orbital debris removal alone is going to be a viable business model. If you try and tell investors that, we don't have a viable business unless regulations change, then you're not going to get anything done.
Exactly.
And so our goal at Turion is to kind of go towards that path, but also build a viable, profitable business along the way.
So help me build a bridge between the MVP that you mentioned, like the first mission or like a couple of first missions, and then the SDA. If the SDA is like low-hanging fruits for commercialization, like how do you connect the first missions with the SDA business model?
Sure. So as far as the min viable product goes, our Droid 1 satellite, we're calling our vehicles droids. Our Droid 1 vehicle we are launching next April. And we're very excited about that mission. But when I say MVP, I mean it's an MVP. We're calling that one just get it up there. Our goal with that satellite was to get something into orbit that is useful as fast as we can, and to build kind of the foundation of the team along the way. Because for doing satellites, there are multiple different categories of engineers that you need. GNC, flight software, mechanical, a whole bunch of different things. And so with our MVP, we're approaching this as, okay, we're going to go all commercial off-the-shelf components, And I won't go into the details of, our suppliers, but we're working with some great partners that we will likely work with well into the future. Over time, we want to vertically integrate different aspects of our satellite in-house related to, some of the hardware design and stuff like that. The way that we see our smaller satellites evolving over time, and this is kind of where Precious Payloads we're excited to work with you guys, is we're first going to build a couple of satellites that are specifically focused on space domain awareness. We're going to put them up and they're going to stay up there for 5 years, and we're going to sell that data and build a foundation of a revenue stream. After that, we're going to slowly start doing one demonstration on each of our future vehicles. Our first vehicle that we're going to do a demonstration that moves something around in space, so to speak, will be the Droid 4, the Droid 3 or 4 mission. It's still up for trade, but that will basically be us dropping off a CubeSat at a specific altitude that's different from where we're dropped off at on a rideshare mission. And so that's going to be our first kind of go into the space tug kind of business vertical. And people may say, like, look, there's other people already doing this, and I agree. But here's the thing with why it's important is because with Starship coming online, it's going to get a ton of mass into a generic orbit. And other companies realize this too. The satellites that it launches into that generic orbit, many of those are going to want to go to more specific orbit locations. And so that's why we're diving into this early, so that we can demonstrate this early on and then incorporate a higher performance vehicle that drops off a lot more satellites in the future. And for now, we'll just start off with a couple of CubeSats. So yeah, I think that's, the way we're approaching our longer term vehicle design is we are going to design something with maximum delta V per dollar. That's the one metric that you really need to optimize for. And yeah, that's kind of our generic approach. So
to summarize, like, and correct me if I'm wrong, so between the Droid 1 to, let's say, 2 or 3, you guys would put like basically a camera on board that would take the images of other passing satellites, and then you would sell that data to the to the companies and governments that are looking at like space station awareness domain, right? And then like you would slowly evolve, starting from the mission 4, you would slowly evolve, you add the propulsion system, you slowly evolve the business model towards the in-space transportation and provides the service to drop off at different orbits for your customers, right?
Exactly. So after the first couple satellites that are just doing SDA, we'll do the final orbit delivery drop off, basically the space tug, we'll do that. And then once we drop off those CubeSats, we'll go do SDA for the rest of the life of the mission. And then the vehicle after that will include a vision system. And the vehicle after that will include a capture mechanism so that we can demonstrate the docking on ourselves before doing it to other people. So that's kind of how we're thinking about the evolution of our vehicles. What I learned from before Turion Space, I was at SpaceX for 8.5 years. And one thing that you learn about working under Elon is you want to test and iterate on your product as quick as you can. And, trying to go from nothing to a vehicle that can remove orbital debris is a lot harder than iterating quickly and just getting something into space and learning from what will likely happen is, some mistakes along the way. So that's kind of how we're approaching this, is taking that SpaceX philosophy and applying it to this problem and building a viable business along the way by selling the SDA data and demonstrating other key aspects of what we want to be really good at in the long run.
Makes a lot of sense to me. I really have the picture in my mind of like multiple droids that have this almost like swappable payloads on them. Like hey, you want the SDA sensor, here you go. You want to have like a robotic arm, here you go. You want to have like deploy out of CubeSats, here you go. Is that like how you envision the future, where you have like one singular platform, and then you like decide based on your customer demand, you decide which payloads to put on board on that platform?
Yeah, with our early vehicles, it's hard to say whether or not we're going to be able to fit all of those payloads on one, like a vision system, a capture mechanism, an SDA optical system, and a CubeSat deployer. If we can, then one route we might go is, as we demonstrate one thing, we add one new thing per new satellite, and we kind of go from there. And so that by droid 6 or 7, you have the full package. Or we may only do one at a time and primarily just demonstrate one thing and then go do SDA and then incorporate the lessons learned from that into our next generation droid beta vehicles.
Okay, cool. Let's shift the gears a little bit and then talk about the potential customers and leads. So what we've learned in the Precious Payloads is that we work a lot with the companies that are making planning their first missions for the future constellations. And then what we learned about that, it's really hard for them to incorporate the platforms or capabilities that will become available by the time they start rolling their constellations in their early mission design. So if you could say a few words about what could change in the perception of the in-space mobility for the customers that are planning the rollout of their constellations in, let's say, 2024, 25, by the time you get your space tag online?
Yeah, so I think, it comes down to, it really comes down to delta V per dollar. And okay, if you are a satellite constellation and let's say Starship drops you off, but you need to be on a slightly different inclination by a couple degrees, that's quite a bit of delta V. And likely your best bet is going to be to ride on a dedicated launcher. And the total cost will definitely be a lot higher than Starship rideshare. So where we think kind of the space tugs in the final orbit drop off really playing a big role is kind of just acting as that third stage, right? Is having a cost where the rideshare plus the cost of getting to the specific orbit should be much lower than a dedicated launch vehicle. That's one area that we think if Starship succeeds, there's going to be a huge need there. That basically satellite operators, the cheapest option to get to their specific orbital slot will be to fly on a space tug that flies on one of these fully reusable launch vehicles, whether it's Starship or someone else, which there are several other interesting launchers coming online soon. So yeah, and I think there's going to be multiple viable space tugs out there. You already see a few that are operational. So I think there's going to be at some point probably just as many or more space tugs as there will be launch vehicles. Yeah, exactly. So like I said, what we primarily want to be good at is moving stuff around in space. And so I think if we're really good at that, then that kind of vertical makes a lot of sense. And that's where we've had a decent amount of customer traction. But this is also why we're kind of looking at SDA, because let's say that doesn't pan out how we think it might. We still have a viable product that can generate revenue and still aligns with the philosophy of sustainable space. So yeah, that's kind of how we're thinking about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Can you elaborate a little bit more about we keep discussing about the SpaceX and Starship and other space companies. Talk to me a bit about whether you're planning to make your platform compatible with the other launchers, and in general, what would be the interface between the customer and your company? Are you going to tell them, hey, listen, go and book your first leg of your space access yourself, and then we will take care of the second leg? Or are you going to be a fully integrated partner saying that, hey, we'll get you to the final destination, so we'll take care of both the first leg and the second leg as well?
I think what's going to be, it's all about it's all about the customer in the end, right? And if you're one of these satellite operators, the easiest way that this is going to work for them is going to just be to go directly to whoever is deploying them, whether that's one of the existing space tugs, us, or one of the other rideshare kind of partners. I think in the long run, it makes sense to work with the customer directly and just give them the requirements that are necessary for whatever the launch vehicle is. As far as interfacing with different launch vehicles, I definitely think that would be the case. In general, it seems to me like most new launch vehicle companies, in order to increase their own competitiveness with SpaceX and Rocket Lab and other people, using standardized adapter rings and stuff like that is going to be the obvious decision rather than having to customize things for a specific launch vehicle. So I do believe that there's going to be, and there already exists, some level of standardization on the integration front.
Totally. Yeah, with it as well. Right. The last one from me. In the slides that you sent to me prior to this meeting, I noticed that you guys have a really impressive team on board. So can you talk a little bit about the team, like a founding team, and how many people are working now in the company?
Yeah, absolutely. And I could first maybe even touch on a little bit of the founding, kind of how we all came together, the founding team, and maybe even dive a little bit more into kind of the history there, because I think that might be a little interesting. And then I'll get into the rest of the team. So yeah, back in the day, back in 2013, I think is when I first met Tyler, one of the co-founders. Tyler he's a lot of background in thermal and dynamics analysis for a whole bunch of different satellites from his last company. But we met as undergrads at the University of Washington aerospace engineering undergrad department. So we became close there, and we actually one summer while we were both interning at SpaceX, we were roommates while we were interns. So that was a bunch of fun. After we graduated, we kind of took different paths. I stayed at SpaceX for the next 8.5 years, primarily working on propulsion dynamics, which was super interesting. Got to work on some of the most challenging and rewarding problems at SpaceX that the company was facing, from various anomaly investigations and trying to figure out like what actually happened given a minimal amount of data. And Patrick, the other co-founder, he has a software background ever since he finished school back in 2014. And Patrick and I have actually been friends since 6th grade. So we've been great friends for a long, long time. And kind of during COVID, Patrick was moving into the bottom floor of my condo, and we're always talking about random startup ideas and stuff like that. Not too seriously, but the first thing as Patrick was moving into the bottom floor of my condo, the first thing I asked him, rather than helping him carry the boxes that he's struggling to bring inside, was, "So Pat, what are we building?" He's like, "I don't know, but I'm down." And honestly, within about a week, we started really thinking about what is Starship going to mean for the future and other launch vehicles like that, and really kind of started figuring out that orbital debris is a good starting point and a very important problem to solve. It's a difficult business case, but it's a very important problem to solve, because really, if we let the Kessler syndrome get out of control, then we can pretty much be blocked off from making money in low Earth orbit. And we think that making money in low Earth orbit, that is the key to expanding across the rest of the solar system. So if we lose that key forcing function, it's not going to be great, I would say. And so that's why we're really focused on that. After that, we started thinking about, okay, we probably want one more technical co-founder that has space experience. So Tyler was like the first person we thought of. We brought him up. I told him to come up to watch some UFC fights one weekend. He came up and, nice. One shot of tequila later, he was sold on the idea and he was all in. So awesome. We applied to YC, we got in, we all quit our jobs the next day, and here we are.
Classic founding story. I like it.
Yeah, and the rest of the team, it's been a combination of luck at just finding the right people, but also the right people finding us. Yessie, who's on the call, she was actively looking for orbital debris companies in Southern California. There's not a lot of them. I think we might be the only one. And so she found us, and she's been absolutely essential to the team, as has everybody else. We have, our flight software engineer both of them coming from NASA, and the rest of the team just has equally solid backgrounds that play key roles on the team. So I think one of the keys, you'll definitely hear a lot right now about how difficult hiring is, and it's definitely challenging talking to so many people to find people who are both the right technical fit and culture fit. But one of the things that I think has made our process a little bit, I won't say easy, because it hasn't been easy, but I will say that has allowed us to build the team we need in the right amount of time, is having both a near-term vision and a long-term vision that is super exciting, and also having a viable business model that backs up that vision. Without a viable business model, I mean, trying to hire the right people, you have to persuade them to quit their great jobs and join some crazy startup. And they want to know that there's at least a decent chance of financial success. And having the business model is not only important when you're looking for investors, but also when you're hiring great candidates, because great candidates will ask the hard questions. So
yeah, 100%. I totally agree that both like having the viable business model in the space industry, which is hard of itself, plus having the right vision and mission that sort of like unites the team around one common goal is a very important thing for a space startup, because working in the space industry is not easy. Like people who are like, you know, who want to enjoy the great financial success plus enjoy like big, like I would say, big velocity of the customer feedback, space industry is not the right place to be. Like the feedback loop from the market is extremely slow. Yeah, so totally agree. Just last one, talk to me a bit about your like experience of going through Y Combinator, because I've seen that YC has backed a lot of companies such as Momentus, Transastra, you have HO Robotics. So there's like tons of great companies coming out of Y Combinator. So how was it like? Did you find any meaningful, let's say, advice, or what resources have been helpful to you during the days of Y Combinator?
Y Combinator was the best thing we could have asked happen to us. Before Y Combinator, we had, you know, quite a few no's before we got the yes that we really needed. And for us, this won't be the same for all companies. Some companies may join Y Combinator at a much later stage, and their perception on how valuable it was for their team may be different than ours. But I think a big part of YC is also you take out of it what you put into it. If you are generally optimistic and open-minded, you're going to get a lot more out of YC. And for us, it was amazing. I mean, the best advice and stuff that we got from YC may seem ridiculously obvious, but like our strategy has evolved a lot because of kind of the key principles that YC drove into our goals. Talking to customers, I mean, that might sound obvious, but when I remember when we went to our first YC partner meeting after starting the program, they're like, so what's your strategy and all this stuff? And we're like, so we're going to first design our vehicle and then we're going to go talk to customers. And they're like, no, stop what you're doing now and talk to customers. And although we still did have a heavy focus, and obviously now that's primarily what the team is focused on is the product, you don't know what you need to build until you talk to customers. And so, we talked to literally everybody we possibly could. And that exercise was and remains extremely valuable when you're trying to build a startup in a highly dynamic and evolving industry like space. Space right now, it's probably not going to look the same as it will in 5 years from now. So it's very important not to get too tied to any specific idea and to just continue to make progress and continue to adapt the strategy as you learn, as you get more information. But in general, I absolutely loved YC, and it was the key to getting to where I think we are today. And we're not that far today. We still haven't launched our first satellite. That's still a little less than a year out now, but we've made a lot of progress to getting to this point.
That's exciting, very close to the mission of our company, because we want to empower the space entrepreneurs to just focus on talking to the customers and building, like maturing their business model, while like we take care of their MVP and go-to-market strategy, so that's reducing the feedback loop from launching more and more missions, iterating faster in technology and a business model is very close to what we do at Precious Payload. Cool, Ryan, that's been the best 30 minutes of this week, I would say. It's really exciting to learn more about the company, and moreover, it's really exciting to helping you guys to get first customers and spread the word about your company across the global community of space entrepreneurs. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, it was great talking to you today, and we'll look forward to staying in touch and circling back after the first mission for sure.
Amazing.
All right, talk to you later.
Cool. Thanks, Ryan. It's been amazing.